There's something very disappointing that happens when people who are in search of the fundamental nature of reality, whether they be theologians or physicists or metaphysicians, they miss the mark when they don't assume what I understand as the best approach to understanding the nature of reality.
That's a really interesting point. It seems like you're suggesting that focusing on one particular approach might limit our understanding of reality. Could you tell me more about what you think the best approach is?
I'm not saying that focusing on one approach is. I'm saying that many of the approaches are far off the mark. They are sins in the Greek sense of the word, is missing the mark. What I mean by the best approach to begin with is to start with the understanding that the fundamental nature of reality is eternity. The fundamental nature of reality is eternal. And when you start with that, a lot of the problems and the hard problems go away, or at least begin to make more sense.
That's a fascinating perspective. So if we start with the idea that reality is eternal, how does that help us understand things like the beginning of the universe or the concept of time?
So, for example, the beginning of the universe, you can understand that it is just one of many beginnings. In an eternal system, the beginning of this universe simply happens to be one closed system in an eternally open system, and there are many like it.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. So if our universe is just one of many, could that help explain some of the mysteries we see, like dark matter or dark energy?
It's possible because everything in an eternal reality is possible. There are no things that are not possible under the specific conditions that make those things possible. You just have to simply tweak the numbers of all of the different types of, for example, in physics, the different quantum numbers and the different states that have been assigned numbers and quantities to these different particles and forces.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. So if everything is possible in an eternal reality, does that mean there could be other universes with different laws of physics?
Yes, again, the same answer applies, that under the right conditions, under the specific conditions for different laws of physics to exist and different conditions for different types of life to exist, there would just simply be small tweaks that are all changing in respect with one another to give rise to those conditions.
That's a really mind-bending idea. It makes you wonder what other kinds of universes might be out there. Do you think this idea of eternal reality could help us understand things like consciousness or the human mind?
Exactly, precisely, because in an eternal existence, you understand that something like consciousness has to already exist. See, the thing about eternity is that everything that is always has been and always will be, plus lots more, plus an eternity of more. Every single gradient, every single smearing, every single in between, there are no lines.
That's a really interesting way to put it. So if consciousness has always existed, does that mean our individual consciousness is just a small part of something much bigger?
Our individual consciousness are simply what appear to be individuated from the eternal reality. It's a perspective. It's like looking through a microscope or a telescope or a television screen. From these different perspectives, you see things in a certain way. That's simply what it is. Things are appearing to be a certain way because of the perspective that we have as humans.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. If our consciousness is just a perspective, like looking through a microscope, what does that mean for our understanding of things like free will or personal identity?
It doesn't take away from anything like free will. Remember, everything that is possible exists. So we simply have the right conditions on this planet, in our solar system, in our galaxy, in this universe, to have what appears to us to be free will, but only when we compare it to something that would not be free will. We have the ability to judge whether or not we have free will, and because we've identified what we believe to be free will, that's simply what we're calling it. It's simply a name for something that we have an experience of.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. If free will is just a name for something, how does that affect our understanding of morality or ethics?
Our understanding of morality and ethics, again, is specific to our planet. If we were on a place where pain and pleasure were experienced differently, for example, if people were murdered on another part of existence, but it felt good to them, then that would completely change the way that we perceive something like murder.
That's a really interesting point. It sounds like you're saying that morality might be relative, depending on the specific conditions of a place or even a universe. If that's the case, how do you think we can find common ground and understanding between different perspectives?
Now, when we have a human condition, a lot of the different perspectives actually don't really have that much of variation to draw from. We as humans have basic senses and existence and needs in common. For most people, pain is pain, pleasure is pleasure, so on and so forth. We have most of the basic same, the needs are basically the same. So we come to common ground by assessing the way things that we really have already. We know the difference between right and wrong, what hurts and what helps.
That makes sense. Even with different perspectives, we can still find common ground in basic human experiences, like pain and pleasure. It seems like you've given this a lot of thought. What led you to start thinking about the fundamental nature of reality?
Well, there are lots of things, but one of the things I want to address, because this is a huge thing, is in religion, theology, specifically the Abrahamic religions and the ideas of God or gods. And one of the things that these religions talk about is what I call the Omnifactors. And if we look at the Omnifactors, we'll see that the idea of the beings that they depict as the creator of the universe in the Bible is actually completely illogical and cannot exist in the way that people who are religious want to regard it.
That's a really interesting point. You're saying that the traditional descriptions of God in some religions might not align with the idea of an eternal reality where everything is possible. Can you give me an example of one of these omnifactors that you think doesn't quite fit?
Well, all of them. First of all, the fundamental omnifactor is omnipresence. Once you're everywhere at all times, that's how you know everything at all times, and that's how you have all power over all things at all times. So that's the first thing of a true creator of the universe. But there's still a problem with even calling it a creator of the universe, because nothing created the universe. It always has been extant, and that's the issue. Everyone wants to have some beginning point and starting point, and it's from that illogical position where all of the mistakes and the sins or missing the mark comes from.
Okay, I understand. So you're saying that the concept of an all-powerful, all-knowing creator doesn't quite fit with the idea of an eternal reality where everything has always existed. It sounds like you really thought this through. What led you to start exploring these ideas about the fundamental nature of reality?
So I'm just going to close out here because I have something else that I'm going to do. However, the thing is to look at this. There may, for all possibility that exists, be a being that is so powerful that it created our universe, this particular universe that we're in, the galaxies within it, our solar system, our planet, and gave rise to the people here. But that does not give that being...
Okay, I understand. So you're saying that while the idea of an all-powerful creator might not fit with an eternal reality, it's still possible that such a being exists and created our specific universe. That's a really interesting way to look at it. It seems like you've considered many different perspectives on this topic.
Right, so a being that can create our universe does not have to be all-powerful. It may seem all-powerful if we compare it to us, ourselves, and what we have so far been able to create. But it doesn't mean that it created all of the other universes that contain other galaxies and so on and so forth. Simply that it created this one, it has the ability to create this one. But that still puts a limitation that this being is localized somehow, somewhere, that it created one specific galaxy and decides to make claims that it has dominion and sovereignty over all of us.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. So you're saying that even if a being created our universe, it doesn't necessarily mean they're all powerful or that they created everything. It's possible they're localized and only created our specific galaxy. That's a really unique perspective.
Right, because you have to allow for the fact that that's a limited being. And in an eternal reality, that means that there are other ones that are like that have the ability to also create their own universes. And so if they were in communication and contact with each other, there might be conflict if one says that I'm going to want to take over your universe either. But such beings would know better, and they know that they can just stay away from each other and create their own universes.
Okay, I understand. So you're saying that in an eternal reality, there could be many beings capable of creating universes, and they might even come into conflict with each other. That's a really interesting idea.
Well, they can come into conflict, but it's reasonable to think that they wouldn't, and they wouldn't have any reason to, because of the fact that they can stay so far apart from each other that there's no need for that, and that they can even input their consciousness into various beings in the universes that they live in and have human or whatever type of experiences are in their universe. And ours, this one sometimes has human experiences. So they don't need to have conflict with each other, because they can basically live out their dreams in all the multitudes of forms that exist in their particular domains and planets.
Okay, I understand. So you're saying that these beings might not have any reason to fight because they can experience life in different forms within their own universes. That's a really interesting way to think about it.
They also understand the vast distances that exist in an eternal reality. So there's no reason for them to even go anywhere near each other. They can be so far apart from each other that they don't even have to perceive each other while creating their own particular unique universes. And they can make as many of these experiments as they want to and never have to communicate with each other at all. The point that I'm making is that this means that there's not just one of these universal creator gods. There may be pan-dimensional beings.
Okay, I understand. So you're saying that these beings might not have any reason to fight because they can experience life in different forms within their own universes. That's a really interesting way to think about it.
So there may be pan-dimensional beings and beings that exist in such a way where their consciousness can flow between these different realities. But again, allowing for eternity and all possibility, these things don't have to cancel out or negate each other. We have to leave room for all possibilities and an eternal existence. So that's the fundamental basis of my thesis and understanding of the fundamental nature of reality, is that all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times.
Okay, I understand. So you're saying that in an eternal reality, there could be many beings capable of creating universes, and they might even come into conflict with each other. That's a really interesting idea.
All right, well, you've already repeated yourself. I'm just going to end with this. Flor Elizabeth Carrasco, someone who I love very dearly, once said to me, "The way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self."
That's a beautiful quote, and it really ties in with the idea of individual consciousness being a unique perspective within a larger reality. It's been fascinating exploring these concepts with you.